We are live. Hello and welcome to PropTechBuzz, a podcast channel where we talk to PropTech leaders, CEOs, and founders from all over the world and learn from them how they build and manage successful PropTech companies. Now it's fascinating how I'm bumping into so many new areas of PropTech with this podcast. In fact, I've not yet ventured into commercial PropTech yet. I've not yet ventured into construction tech yet. PropTech by itself is such a big, wide world, and today we are covering yet another new area of PropTech, which is due diligence. And to talk to me about that, we have two veterans from real estate. So it's Justin Leve and Sean Godoy. But before I introduce them to you, I would like to make you a humble request. If you're listening to this episode, consider subscribing to this channel. We are interviewing some of the best minds from PropTech industry from all over the world and sharing it here. And the more people subscribe, the wider are the chances for these interviews to reach. So that's why I request please subscribe. With that, let me introduce our guest, Justin Leve and Son Godway, and both are veterans. So let me go one after another. First is Justin. Justin has a career traversing more than 2 decades in the commercial, industrial, and residential sectors in South Africa and abroad. He has acquired substantial exposure to the multidimensional world of real estate, investment property deal facilitation involving acquisitions and disposals across all property asset classifications has been Justin's forefront role, client facing roles. In addition to which, he continues to provide bespoke due diligence advisory covering the fundamentals of property investment at the transaction level. Alongside Sean, Justin is also a head tutor on the acclaimed UCT Property Development and Investment online short course presented by Get Smarter. So, as you can see, he's a veteran. Let's introduce the second veteran, Sean. Sean is a property professional who has spent over a decade working in various sectors of the property industry in both South Africa and the UK. Most of his professional experiences has been as a property market analyst and commentator. In 2017, he founded Diversity Property Solutions, which offers a range of advisory and training solutions to the property industry in South Africa, as well as other parts of sub-Saharan Africa. He's a PropTech commentator and enthusiast, and is also a co-founder of the South Africa PropTech and PropTech Africa associations. So Sean is also head tutor of the UCT Property Development and Investment online short course. With that, let's welcome Justin and Sean. Justin and Sean, welcome to PropTechBuzz. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much, Ravi. Great to be here, and yeah, thanks for having us.
Excellent. Very curious to know about the world of due diligence. I gave a brief background, and it seems like you are veterans into this field. Maybe what would be while the meat of the conversation is due diligence, what would be good to know is your journey into the prop tech space. What brought you to start PropDD?
Hmm. Yeah, maybe Justin, I don't know if you want to jump in.
Yeah. Well, I guess, Sean, thank you. Ravi, great to meet you, and thanks for covering all the bases on my background. You pretty much got it all there. So previously, or prior to PropDD, I had very little experience in the tech industry. As you mentioned, I came out of a transactional background, focusing on investment sales, and also due diligence advisory surrounding property transactions, but primarily in the commercial sector. And obviously, having met Sean on the course that you mentioned, we saw an opportunity to ideate around due diligence, but for the residential property sector, where we found that there's a dire need for greater transparency and disclosure around property transactions, which is sorely lacking, but in our research, not just in South Africa, but worldwide. So that's how we came together with our ideas and a framework that we built in order to successfully carry out a due diligence investigation for a specific residential property transaction.
So for the layman who is not from PropTech, what does due diligence mean?
So due diligence is really about verifying and evaluating the risks, responsibilities, and costs around the purchase of a property. But it's also about assessing the upside, which is very important, medium to long term. So that could be about sort of looking at various levels of the acquisition on a legal, technical, and financial basis. And Sean, I don't know if you want to drill down into those aspects.
Yeah, sure. So, like Justin explained, it's at a high level, it's just looking at the key aspects of a property before you purchase that property, either as a home buyer or as an investor. So, in the residential space, there's a lot happening in PropTech, and it tends to be the biggest area of activity for PropTech in most markets. If you look at, and the US leads by a wide margin. I mean, they are a massive market, but residential is very strong, and it's kind of been ahead of commercial, although obviously it's a mixed bag. But in the residential space, things are changing, and there is a lot more information available. But the due diligence process, that word might be a bit unfamiliar, or scare some home buyers off, perhaps, or they might just they might think it's overcomplicated and difficult to understand and carry out. But it's just about getting the right information. And I mean, there's so many, there's a lot of good content out there in different countries, and here as well, there's a lot of property websites that give you some great insights into the home buying process, the transfer process, things to consider. But there's the lack of a framework of specifics to take for people to understand what is important. And you get that question a lot, like Justin said, you might be out socially, and if you're in property, that always like, well, the big question is it the time to buy or sell? And that's always what everyone wants to know. But they also ask what's important, what are the risks, the issues. So there's a lot of talk because a home is or a home or investment property is close to everyone. Basically, it's like a basic human need, so it's very common amongst people. So there's a lot of talk. Like I said, there is a lot of good information, a lot of good professionals, but there's perhaps a lack of clarity around this process. So it's also really what brought us here. And it's those stages, like Justin said, identify the property. Identifying it's important, obviously, from the beginning. Make sure you know what you're dealing with. The physical inspection is key. You're dealing with a property as a physical thing in the ground. So there's a lot of online activity and products and tools, obviously, and whether it's investing, etc. But you have to remember, or like virtual tours, etc. But you have to see it. You have to, like a very sort of prominent property sort of tycoon in South Africa said, you have to kick the bricks like you kick the tires of a car. So that's really important. And then it's what makes sense, basically, in terms of if you're thinking of investigating an investment or some sort of purchase. So it's the technical, legal, and financial aspects that are really important. Specific technical considerations, certifications. Obviously, sometimes there's requirements, obviously, for electrics, this type of thing. The plans are really important. That what the council or the municipality has on their records is what is in the ground. And then legal, obviously, confirming ownership, making sure, obviously, zoning, etc., is in order. And then financial, obviously, like what is it going to cost to own this property and live there, or an investor? Obviously, that's a bit wider in terms of operating costs. So yeah, in a nutshell, it's really to bring this clarity in something that's quite common in the commercial space to the residential space, and empower home buyers and investors just with a clear sort of neutral, it comes from a neutral place, from market and industry knowledge, from Justin and I's diverse backgrounds. And it's meant to be like a neutral central place tool that takes people through this. It's educational, allows them to store data, documents securely, share that. At the end of the day, make a better decision and know what they're getting. So
I think also Sorry. Thanks, Sean. And also just to add to that is that most property buyers would consider due diligence as checking the condition of the property, as a sort of off the bat. But it goes well beyond that for the factors that Sean mentioned. It's such a diverse subject, and every no two due diligence exercises are the same on any on different properties. So, it could be checking the zoning of the property, to determine the sort of intended use, whether you intend developing the property. It could also be about checking the market conditions, which precedes the actual property-specific due diligence investigation. But I'm jumping around a bit. But there's specific also getting an understanding of the full responsibilities in terms of costs, your operating costs. If you're buying an investment property, that's going to be very important about getting a full breakdown of your rates and taxes, or your municipal utilities, who covers that. If there's a tenant in the property, what's the rental? Let's look into the lease agreement, terms and conditions, to ascertain if there's anything onerous that would prevent you from purchasing the property. So it has to be, one has to work within a well-defined framework, which is sort of separated on different levels. And as you work through that process, you uncover those risks, responsibilities, costs, and gather a story around that property. And that will lead to an informed decision on whether or not to proceed. And as Sean also mentioned, it's a very commonplace, due diligence is very commonplace from a contractual perspective in commercial property transactions. But it's not very common, or I should say it's not entrenched in sale agreements or offers to purchase residential property. But we are slowly seeing that take place in the residential property market. And what we're trying to establish is a method or methodology for every purchase, particularly for first-time buyers, but even for savvy, seasoned property investors that need a framework within which to work, and they can obviously replicate that on every deal that they pursue.
Got it. So it seems like it's a big. The value proposition is big. It's a big pain point. However, I would help me understand if I'm missing or it is too simplistic. I was under the impression that a real estate agent or a realtor who's the intermediate to enable this transaction between the buyer and seller would be the one who would be offering all this information for the transaction, right? So do you think that they are not doing enough for due diligence?
So, Ravi, I would say that that to some extent, agents do conduct due diligence, and most agents understand what due diligence entails, but they don't necessarily understand the entire process. So they may think that a due diligence on any given property may just be about disclosure or the minimum disclosure requirements in terms of potential defects in the property. Mm-hmm. Or if there's delivering documentation that's very superficial in order to get the deal over the line. But it is it's an ethical question. I think there's a lot of ethics involved. Many agents don't conduct due diligence because they feel that it might scupper the deal and scare the buyer away. Whereas we're actually trying to change that perception, because we feel that in order to do a service to sellers, if one is able to create a greater level of transparency around a transaction, in effect, it should lead to a faster or quicker decision-making by buyers. And also it establishes trust as well. But in essence, nowadays there's so much data available to buyers that it would be short-sighted not to be able to disclose the relevant information, because they can go out and find that information themselves, if they're really committed to it. So we feel that it is an agent's duty, but also we find that that our toolkit that we've developed is well received amongst agents, because it sets a framework in place where they can utilize and recognize areas where a specific property might require a specific due diligence information and documentation, which they need to obviously present to a buyer or any number of buyers. And so they don't necessarily have to utilize the toolkit in its entirety in order to conduct that process, because some properties require minimal due diligence and others require a greater level of due diligence. So it really is, it's, I always say that for successful due diligence outcomes, it requires a level of collaboration and cooperation between buyer and seller, but the agent's very much involved in that process as an aggregator between those two parties. So we can't discount the importance of the agent in that process.
It's a huge topic in the PropTech space. Like I said, residential is perhaps bigger, but also in the commercial broking agent space. But the question of PropTech and what impact that has on agents, especially with the middleman, intermediate relationships. So there's been a lot of, especially in, I don't know, PropTech's timeline, 10 years, there's a lot happened, and there was a lot of talk of, intermediaries being replaced by platforms, like Airbnb and these types of things. But as things have progressed, I mean, some companies have tried to replace agents, and I think the most famous example is Zoopla, I believe. I get confused with Zoopla and other big American platform, but it didn't work. So agents are crucial because property is physical and it's an emotive thing. It's especially residential. It's a home. It's really important. So the agent is crucial, and there can be all sorts of stereotypes, etc., like any industry. But like Justin said, the agents they follow industry best practice. They follow regulations, and the thing is, all this information is out there, so buyers could go get it. It's not necessarily hidden. I mean, obviously, people can have different agendas, and it's like buying a secondhand car. People might not want to tell you certain things, but all that information is out there. So this provides, again, like this neutral, open framework, that allows both parties to explore the due diligence, learn about it, and I guess be more informed. And the agents can be helped to provide more information, and that could help speed up the deal and make things smoother in the transfer, like Justin said. And then buyers, they know what questions to ask. They can feel a bit more confident. And investors, obviously, due diligence, the investors, you vet a company, you vet an investment. Due diligence it's a known term in different, the financial sector and commercial property, and that principle remains the same. So I think, just as the macro views, the phrase you see probably coming up often is, PropTech won't replace agents; it needs to enable them. So we feel that our product does that, and it's and like Justin said, it's a collaborative relationship, and the product can work for both. And there's space, just talking at a wider picture, there's space for products like this in specific areas and tools that can help the process. So it's a very good question. I think the agents and the role, in the new PropTech world is a big topic.
Correct. No, I understand. Realtors are incentivized to go ahead with the transaction because that's how they earn their commissions. So it's even if it is well intent, but it's hard to keep information neutral, right? You would be biased to hide certain information so that you go ahead with the transaction. So I can completely understand. But my question to you is, just as agents are hard to replace because of their strong local knowledge, are due diligence operators like you or providers like you also need to be local? Like how can you do a good due diligence if you are not local, or could you be a national player and have the same due diligence across geographies?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, there are universal principles of due diligence that are applicable to all jurisdictions. But obviously, what's relevant to property practitioners or estate agents is obviously understanding the legal and regulatory environment within the local market or regional national market. So yes, in a sense, one has to be knowledgeable within one's own domain. But that's not necessarily how we positioned our toolkit. We in fact developed it to be able to be scaled internationally. Obviously, one has to look at each jurisdiction where it might be applicable, and to make minimal changes, in fact, that are required to the toolkit itself. But we developed in a way that it could be used universally. There's some, when we launched the toolkit as it is now, our intention was to launch it within the South African market and speak to the specific needs of our local market, but obviously with the intention of making minimal changes in terms of its design to structure framework for the global market. And in fact, we're actually looking now at other jurisdictions on the African continent, like Kenya, Nigeria, who've expressed, players on the ground there have expressed strong interest in utilizing this product to create greater transparency, or they see the need for greater transparency around property transactions in those markets.
So, and just to add, I think to your question about being local knowledge. So, the tool enables people to carry out due diligence. So, like Justin said, the beauty of it is we've designed this the toolkit and the process and educational elements and the tools that it can be applied anywhere to any property. Obviously, it allows for the fact that every property is unique and the information will be different. The technical, the legal aspects, the the market knowledge. But that's the beauty of it, is trying to bring something that's clear and simple, like I said, and transparent, and simplifies the process and gives people a framework. So it could be used in any property. Obviously, countries have different legal frameworks, etc. But in its essence, the framework can be applied anywhere. And people, they carry out the due diligence, and the tool enables them, step by step, to which information to look for, what to gather, etc. And they pull that together.
Got it. I'll come to the toolkit. I'm very curious to know about what you offer as a product. But before that, maybe what would be helpful to know is where in the buyer's journey do you come in, and who do you offer this toolkit to? Is it to the realtor or the real estate agent, or to the buyer? Who is your end customer, and how do you come into place in this transaction?
That's actually a great question. We actually developed the toolkit as like Sean said, it was obviously a educational product or process. It has a wizard which takes you step by step through the stages of due diligence and the different levels: legal, technical, financial. And when we launched the product, we wanted to ensure that it can actually be utilized by all three parties, because each party has a need for due diligence for their own purposes. So starting with a buyer obviously would be the obvious user, because they would want to obviously evaluate and verify all the necessary documentation and information around the property. But also a seller may utilize it to make those necessary disclosures upfront, create that sense of transparency, establish trust with a buyer or any number of buyers that are actually looking at their property, that have expressed interest in buying. And then in that way, it boosts the marketability of the property, but then it also potentially fast tracks that sale. But in the same way that a seller would use the toolkit, an agent would utilize the toolkit on their behalf. So if they hand over the due diligence requirements to, or I should say, if a seller hands over the due diligence requirements to, or the process to an agent, they can conduct that exercise on their behalf in order to facilitate sale with any number of buyers that have expressed interest in a property.
Got it. So PropDD is not facilitating the due diligence, like you are not sealing, saying that this property has been performed due diligence by us, but you're giving them to do their own due diligence. Am I right?
So that's exactly what I wanted to actually say up front, is that we're actually not we don't facilitate that transaction.
Got it.
We're only providing a framework within which the parties can conduct a pre-transaction due diligence.
Got it.
Ideally, it's not to say that they can't conduct their DD during the offer process. So if, let's say, a buyer submitted their OTP, and the OTP makes it subject to a due diligence being fulfilled to their satisfaction, they can then also utilize the toolkit during that purchase phase. But ideally, what we're trying to facilitate is a pre-transaction due diligence process where the parties can get all of that information delivered up front. And so intrinsic to that, the toolkit is in fact the sharing functionality, which we've built into the platform, where if you're a seller, you can share that information with your buyers or your agent. If you're a buyer, you can share that information with your attorney or your partners, your co-investors. So anybody that's specifically looking at your due diligence information along that process. It could be your financing bank as well, because often a bank will do their own due diligence. So supplying that information to the bank could also speed up the finance application process.
Nice.
So that's another relevant point as well.
Nice. So I now understand that there are multiple parties benefiting from your toolkit. However, who is your actual customers? Like, I'm sure a buyer or a seller would only sell a property in a lifetime, right? But the realtor is somebody who does this as his daily job. So is this something that the realtor has with him as a license to your toolkit, and then maybe he's charging some service fee as part of his services? Who is their end customer?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It was part of our journey in terms of who the customer is. So
who's paying for it? Like, I'm sure everybody is using it. Everybody's
yeah. Well, it's a good question, because the product can be used, and bought by the agent or the buyer. This is the thing. So, traditional the commercial due diligence model, a DD pack or due diligence information pack is provided. Say a building is being sold. I mean, Justin knows this process much better than I do, but in simple terms, the seller will provide this pack of information, and then the buyer, the interested buyer will take that information and do their due diligence. So the seller provides some information up front, but it's the buyer's duty to interrogate that information and then carry out additional information that they need. So with the toolkit, like we said, it's this platform to aggregate, take people through the process. What do you actually need? So on one hand, obviously it makes sense for buyers. You're vetting this property. You don't know what to look for. You're like, how do I assess? What do I look for? Is it just looking for leaks and water stains on the ceiling? What type of things do legal servitudes? So that's obviously a buyer wants to know what they're buying. But on the other side, a seller or agent, if they at least start the process, and then potential buyers come and they could say, if they're interested and want more info, they could easily share online with with the platform, the way it's designed. They could share this information up front, like it happens in the commercial sector. So a buyer could go online, see the documents, read the report that's generated automatically. So it's a great marketing tool. So then the agent's being transparent, and it's preempting and giving them things that they will most likely need, and some that they probably hadn't thought of. So it works for both sides. And if you look at the commercial sector, it's roughly the same model. And Justin, I don't know if you want to make comments there, because that's obviously Justin's expertise.
So it's an interest. So I'll come to the sort of standard procedure for a commercial due diligence, but it's an interesting question. Who are our buyers? And it really depends on who's doing their due diligence. Is it the buyer? Is it the seller? Is it the agent?
Right.
So we didn't want to leave anyone out in that process. We wanted to make sure that, if it's a seller or an agent on their behalf, that they can utilize the toolkit in order to share that information with the buyers.
Right.
And we've built that functionality into the actual back end of the platform.
Got it.
So once they've completed their due diligence, and they've the report can be generated at any time.
Right.
Even if they're halfway through their DD, we've designed a report that it's date and time stamped. So even if there's limited information that's available at that specific time, they can still share that information.
Right.
But yeah, so I don't know if that answers the question. Who's our customer? Depends on who's doing the DD.
Got it.
And then in terms of the commercial due diligence process, so what happens is, obviously an agent will market a property, buyer will come along, they'll sign an offer to purchase, and in that offer to purchase will be a standardized due diligence clause that will provide them with sufficient time within which to conduct that due diligence investigation,
right,
and to ascertain that there's nothing onerous in the transaction that would ordinarily prevent them from proceeding with the deal. So it's entirely at their discretion whether or not to proceed once that due diligence investigation has been fulfilled and completed. And so it sits within the transaction. So the transaction is live, and there's a time frame within which the buyer is under pressure to fulfill that due diligence. And usually within that due diligence clause, it requires the seller to cooperate as far as possible in providing all that information and documentation in order to enable the buyer to speedily complete that process.
Got it.
That's how traditional due diligence is done. But we wanted to make sure, because, particularly, with keeping in mind first-time buyers going into a transaction, it's very difficult for them to understand that process. And so we wanted to design a product that can enable them to do a pre-offer due diligence investigation. Mm-hmm. And that is really, where that risk is assessed. There's no point in proceeding with an offer if there's something onerous that's going to land them in hot water at some point during the ownership process. And so we saw an opportunity to create a product that can enable them to, readily ascertain all that information up front and make that decision, that informed decision, to proceed once they're ready to do so. They shouldn't be under pressure to conduct that exercise. We don't feel, because it's, buying a property is going to be, certainly a residential property is the biggest financial decision that certainly a first-time buyer is going to make, right, during their lifetime.
Yeah, I understand the importance of this. What is very interesting for me is, as a podcaster, I talk to different players from different countries, and I see so many players. Like just a couple of days ago, I interviewed somebody who has built an app which does live property inspection for over 5,000 data points. So he would, with that app, which has some kind of a thermal radiation that it can catch, which part of the property is damp, what is the elevation like, is it uneven or it is flat, is there any gaps between all the tiles within the property. So it's a property inspection. I would assume it would be a subset of the overall due diligence in some way, isn't it? So I'm just very, very fascinated by so many players coming together, some with tech, some with an application like yours, and how it is maturing. Do you have any comments to make here?
Yeah. Okay. So we've actually built in a component in our toolkit which deals with the inspection process. But I wanted to say that within tech itself, there is so much opportunity to integrate with other applications that we see. In fact, we're actually in the process now of integrating certain aspects of the toolkit itself, and every day we see great opportunity for and specifically around property inspections as well. There's a lot. I mean, PropTech has advanced in so many avenues in the inspection space as well, and that this particular example that you've mentioned as well would be an ideal integration along. In future, I mean, we're talking about blockchain as well.
Right.
These types of applications can fit perfectly within a blockchain ecosystem.
Correct.
And that's why we see a future for the toolkit itself as well within that.
Nice.
And it's exciting, and like Ravi mentioned, there's some great products out there. Some very focused, perhaps some wider, some higher tech, than others. But a key thing is integration and through APIs. So the good systems can do that. And from the beginning, there's so many areas, and we're always excited as we move along the potential for integration. And there's some great in South Africa as well. There's some great property inspection platforms, like you say, that do some really interesting things. And you don't, I guess, you don't want to have like 5 different pieces of software running your building.
Yeah.
But obviously there's specialized things, and you've got to build it to talk to other products, other software, for it to make sense. And there is a lot out there, and things are being built to integrate. So it's quite exciting, I think, how tools can come together.
Right. Because the property inspection tool that I was talking about is about the physical inspection of the quality or the make of the building, of the property.
Yeah.
But you are going beyond. You are all in all aspects, including legal, including technical and stuff like that, right? So you are much broader. And then if there are avenues that are still a gap, you could always integrate with some existing players, so that overall it's a holistic solution, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So that the platform you're talking about, obviously that's it's quite specialized, and obviously it's got a lot of clever tech, and obviously it has certain features. And like you said, that is one element. We, like Justin said, we do account for that. We have an element within the toolkit that guides the person doing the due diligence through an inspection and using notes, etc.
Right.
But like you say, a property's, it's physical, but it's also a financial asset, so it's got financial legal consideration. So yeah, in short, there's a big focus on a physical inspection, which is important. And like I said, the property is a physical thing in the ground, but it's also an asset, and it has financial and legal implications. Yeah.
Do you also do due diligence of the land transaction of the past? Do you provide all that information? Because usually in India there are it has been infamous in a lot of ways. Especially I remember 20 years ago, my dad had bought a piece of land, but then that piece of land in India was sold to four different people. So
that's a really important legal aspect. So it's the toolkit will have it provides for the user to obtain the title deed, which, like you say, that verifies ownership. So it's crucial, because that does happen. It does happen here in various, I know, countries, to the north of us. It's even more common. So, like you say, land can be sold, but you can't verify, or obviously there was some sort of fraud involved. And then when you start laying your foundation, someone walks along and says, "Actually, this is my property.
Right.
You've got no recourse." So that's an element. So it's the steps guide people on what to ask for, what to look for. Because like I said, a lot of this information is available publicly. Like you can go request a title deed, or there's services online that you can go get this document. So people be aware of that. So it's guiding people what to look for, and then obviously there's places they can get this information, or they can ask for it. If they're the buyer dealing with the agent seller. Yeah. So the thing is, if the due diligence is carried out to a sufficient degree, we'll avoid risks such
Got it.
as.
It mitigates risks. Okay. It
Yeah.
also reminds me, I do not know if you followed this, there was the world's biggest demolition happened in India, in Delhi. It was over 100 floors building with
Sure.
100 floors, as in maybe around 100 into 400 units, 400 apartments. It was built, 75% of that was sold, and the courts ordered it to be demolished because they did not have the requisite permissions. So
Wow.
so this can be quite
Yeah.
scary, and players
Yeah.
like you could mitigate a lot of risk and give, because there is a lot of information asymmetry, especially for customers who are buying for the first time. They're doing it for the first time, right? So it gives them tools to ensure that the risks are
Yeah.
minimized.
Yeah. And I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
transactions happen and things work out well, but if things go wrong, they can go very wrong, like that example you said. So it makes sense to check things.
My question to you is due diligence service a new phenomena, or have they been there for some time, or is it maturing, or maybe it was non-existent? As you mentioned, it in residential, it was non-existent. You trust the buyer and the seller, or the intermediary, like the real estate agent. Could you let me know the maturity of due diligence as a service that you are offering? Is it something that you are doing it for the first time, you are disrupting the space, or has it been there for some time?
I think the concept of due diligence has been around for some time, but the practice of due diligence around residential transactions is new, and for that reason, we feel that we're disrupting the residential market in a different way, by providing a sort of a walkthrough process in order to educate buyers and sellers on what's entailed in order to create greater transparency around the purchase or sale of their property. So we feel that it's certainly disrupting processes, but and we're not aware of any sort of specific product that does anything similar to what our toolkit does in terms of its educational aspect. But there are obviously there's a lot of literature out in the on the one can simply Google due diligence, and there's a wealth of information that's available about how to conduct proper due diligence when buying or selling. But certainly nothing like our product.
So what was the status quo before? If this was not there, was it based on whatever information was available or passed out of trust? What's the status quo?
Well, certainly it's not offered up front by sellers or agents, for that matter. But to a large extent, it is. I mean, agents do conduct due diligence on behalf of the parties, if necessary. Are you still there? Can you? Sorry,
Yes. Yeah, you are. Your audio
my
is
screen's
great.
frozen. Are you still there?
No, we can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you. Just that your
Okay.
your video is a little bit, I think it's frozen, but that's okay. We can hear you. My next question is, so is this is also in US? Because I assume the US and the rest of the world are two different markets, right, in terms of maturity of all kinds of real estate practices and processes. Is this common in US, or it is also new there?
It's a good question. Residential property is quite interesting because it can tend to the same pain points can be present in what you'd call developed markets versus complex markets, and sometimes you find processes are better in complex markets, say newer countries, because established countries like the UK, law and processes that it's been around for so long, sometimes it's harder to change. So when I worked in the UK, planning or property transfer, things are changing obviously, and there's a lot of digitization coming to land registries, but there's still a lot of pain points. So it's interesting in residential transactions, residential sales, etc., there are a lot of similar pain points. So in terms of the US, for your question, I mean, I'm not familiar with processes on the ground. Justin might have an understanding, but my contribution is that a lot of these pain points are shared between most countries in terms of residential.
I can imagine.
Justin, are you can you still hear us?
Yeah, I'm just worried that for some reason my screen is sticking. But as long as you can hear me,
yeah, we can hear you perfectly.
Yeah, you could stop your video.
Our competitor research that we've carried out has, there are platforms that conduct, I should say, that offer a similar process, but it's more about verification of just some aspects of due diligence. And what we're trying to create is a framework where there's no limitation on what that due diligence necessarily is, but we provide those steps in order to recognize areas that need to be evaluated. So we've actually refined the toolkit. We didn't want it to be a bloated product. We wanted to make sure that the most important aspects of a due diligence process are covered, but we've also allowed for that to be expanded at the discretion of the user. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's no two due diligence processes are necessarily going to be the same, and every property has different aspects to be considered. So every DD outcome is potentially different, and so yeah. But to my knowledge, there's nothing. I mean, there's traditionally, I would say brokers, buyers and sellers are using like a Dropbox version of document sharing or something similar in order to communicate information that's relevant to a specific deal, but certainly nothing like this that we are aware of, at least.
Got it. You made an interesting point. Sean, did you wanted to add something?
Just, like we feel it is a relevant tool in most markets. Justin mentioned we've had interest from a few, more than one country in sub-Saharan Africa with people we've met in our network. So yeah, there's, I think in short, there's a need for the product in probably in most markets.
Got it.
One some shape or form.
Okay, so Justin dropped. I hope he comes back, but then otherwise, Sean, you can
Sure.
rope him.
No problem.
My question is, I'm still keeping the best for the last, which is to understand your toolkit in details. But I'm just asking a lot more questions out of curiosity. Your product's adoption has a lot to do with how educated the market is, how demanding a buyer is for a proper due diligence platform, right? So so even if the realtor or the seller is not incentivized, the buyer should be more demanding, asking the realtor or to the seller to provide proper due diligence. So what are you doing to educate the market on this?
Yeah. It's a good question, because there's that status quo, and then buyers, like I said, a lot of agents offer a good service, and there's there is information.
now Sean dropped off. So maybe Justin, you can carry on what Sean wanted to say.
Okay, sorry, if I can ask you to repeat the question.
Yes, so my question was, as I said, the due diligence is something that the realtor is not incentivized to provide, or the seller, right? So for you to succeed, for the higher adoption of due diligence services, it is imperative that the market is educated about the need for due diligence. So that they are more demanding in transactions for the due diligence to happen. So what are you doing to educate the market or to the consumers? Like, what are you doing your bit for educating the market on this?
That's absolutely true, and it's a very good insight, Ravi. Is that buyers need to understand what that process entails in order to recognize those potential pitfalls in the the risks, particularly the costs as well, in that process. What we're doing is, well, I mean, outside of marketing, I mean, part of our marketing drive campaign with PropDD is to educate potential buyers and sellers on the relevance of due diligence, and also Sean and I obviously spend a lot of time as thought leaders in our social media channels as well, in sort of creating a greater awareness around not so much due diligence, because particularly for a first-time buyer, they don't really understand the term. So we focus on specific aspects of purchasing or selling that, sort of, I would say, bite-sized chunks of due diligence that people are able to palate and understand and see the relevance of as well. So we don't. It's very difficult to try and explain to someone in a short space of time what the full scope of due diligence is. But it's always easier to have a conversation around specific aspects of due diligence.
Got it.
Whether it's, like you mentioned earlier, the checking the title, the property, previous ownership, assessing if there's any legal restrictions within that title that could, obviously prevent your intentions with the property, whether it's to develop the property further, to add a second or third level to the property, whether to add an additional dwelling and whether that's in fact permissible on the site in terms of the current zoning, or whether a rezoning is necessary. Those small aspects are easy to have a conversation about. Another example is, which often crops up, is often there's structures on the property that haven't, in fact, either not reflected on the building plans, the approved building plans, or in fact, approvals were never, in fact, obtained to build those structures. And so it's important to verify whether existing building structures correspond with the approved plans and vice versa. So there's different aspects are necessary to be assessed depending on who the buyers and what their intentions are. If they're buying an investment property, often front and center are the operating costs that need to be considered, and buyer wants to know whether they're in fact going to have a positive surplus, and also looking at different gearing levels and how much do they necessarily need to fund from their own equity, how much they need to finance, how much of the rental is going to cover the operating costs, and whether they're going to see a surplus or deficit at the end of the day. So those aspects we tackle on an individual basis.
Got it. As I said, I saved the best for the last. Sean, did you try to make a point here?
No, sorry, I just mentioned I'm back. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, so I think Justin mentioned the wonderful load shedding we live with in South Africa, but I forgot to move off of my Wi-Fi booster, so that's why I dropped. But yeah, I think you said how we educate. I think we try. Just I missed that, but obviously having a social media presence, and we have a blog, and we're very pro collaboration with industry bodies, etc.
Right.
So we really try, be collaborative and open to meeting organizations and people.
Correct. Excellent. As I said, the best is saved for the last. So maybe let's dig into the key aspects of your platform, PropDD. Do you want to share about PropDD here?
Sure. Sean, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So we've gone. I guess we've described quite a lot of it in various forms, but I guess in a nutshell, obviously, I guess we don't want to probably do too elaborate an explanation, but at its core, we have the tool. What we call the toolkit is effectively a wizard. So it's a framework, a step-by-step framework that you can navigate through. So we've designed it in a way that it's easy to use. It's intuitive. So we gave a lot of consideration to UX, etc. And we mentioned those. There's basically the 4 categories or sections of the due diligence. So there's entering the deal is property information, various identifying from the address to the legal descriptions, and also the physical inspection tool is included in there. And then we have the technical aspects. So we mentioned that can include plans, etc. Justin can elaborate on this. I'll probably just give her maybe an outline. So there's the technical section, like we mentioned, there's various reports or that might be needed for the physical aspects. You check the plans is a very key one we always mention. Legal aspects, title deed for ownership, considering zoning regulations, so various documents there and areas for disclosure. And then the financial, like we mentioned, are costs related to owning the property and operating that. And then obviously as an investor, that extends from your, there's property taxes. There'll perhaps be things like security or levies if it's in a complex. But then for an investor, obviously they've got to pay for various things to service the tenant. So at its core, there's this wizard that's like we said, so it's step by step. There's 4 sections, and there'll be 3 or 4 steps within each one, and then there's each variable, I suppose. There's different steps that could be entering information or entering comments in a document, and through all of those, terms are explained through our informational modals. So as you move through it, there's explanations and assistance in terms of what that is, and what is important. And that's the actual, you'll populate information and documents into that wizard. And then on your user dashboard, then there's some key functionality. So you basically press a button and all that information you put in is automatically inputted into a generated report. So we've designed a report that's clear and professional. So you can actually download this PDF, and everything reflected and inputted in the toolkit is then in that document. So that's a document that can be shared easily. Like we said, if it's an agent, they could share the document and access to the platform in order to see the documents, or a buyer might share it with their conveyancer or their bank, just to show perhaps what information they have, and it aids parties. It's all about information at the end of the day and verifying. So if you have information available, it helps all the parties. And then, like I said, so it's downloading the reports, and then there's the sharing functionality. So you share read-only access to an external party. So you can share the document or an external party through, we use quite secure sharing mechanisms, and a unique code is sent via mail, etc. So we obviously, security is important. The information can be fairly sensitive, and then basically that party accesses the platform, they see your document bank, and then they have the option to download that report. So in its essence, that's the toolkit wizard. But I'll let Justin add on that or add any additional insight.
Thanks, Sean. Ravi, I see that you showed up the landing page for our site, and on that homepage, you can actually find a demo video which we recently loaded, which provides insight into the actual toolkit itself, which is quite useful. Just to cover the areas. So essentially, the toolkit has, well, inside the toolkit, I should say, has 3 elements, which is an overview, which is a summary of all the documents that have been uploaded into the toolkit. The sharing functionality, where a user can share the information and documents with a third party completely at their discretion. And then the third element, which is the toolkit wizard, which is the sort of working process as you work through that due diligence process, uploading documents, inputting information to each relevant field through those different stages: legal, so as to say, entering the deal, legal, technical, and financial. And then once you've completed that, you can then share access to third parties. They can then come on and download any relevant documents that you've made available to them, and then also generate a report, a due diligence report real time, which provides a summary of all the due diligence information and inputted documents that exist within that toolkit, which they can then take away and present to any parties that are relevant to their process. I should say also there's additional resources that are made available on the user dashboard. So we've provided cash flow calculators that speak to specific types of purchase strategies. So we've considered three main strategies: buying to occupy, buy to let, and then buy to flip. And so integrated within those cash flow calculators are real-time calculators, which we work through an API through a third party, which enables them to calculate real-time purchase costs. So in South Africa, we have transfer duty, which is stamp duty in the UK and other jurisdictions. So that those calculators are able to calculate those payments real time and input that into their cash flow as well. And then also like mortgage repayments, those are also able to be calculated real time. And obviously those become an input as part of the buyer's cash flow, I should say. And then we also provide an additional resource, which is a market analysis how-to guide, which provides a relatively in-depth understanding of how to conduct market analysis prior to identifying a property. So, starting with establishing one's objectives, and we then obviously break down the market analysis into different levels, starting with macro, moving into the regional aspects, and then obviously looking at local market and then property-specific considerations.
Got it. Thank you. That is quite interesting and comprehensive to know. I think you mentioned that this is not just meant for a South Africa or African market, but it could very well be your interests are wider. Could you shed some light on how the toolkit? What are your ambitions, by the way, and is it also meant to be outside African continent?
Yeah, like we touched on it. It's due diligence and the elements and fields within the toolkit itself and the different things we're looking at related to a property. A lot of them are standard, and to each market and standard to the nature of property as an asset. So because of that fact, the process we've done here, it's not a unique thing. It's part of a standard process and information and investigation of a property anyway. So with relatively little tweaking, it can be applied in any market really. For example, the title deed is what we have in South Africa. So that's the deed to the property. It might be called different things in different countries. Perhaps it comes in different forms, but there'll be some document or method of verifying the ownership of that property, and that's a common thing. And then other elements can be different, like how a complex or a apartment building, how that's managed, and how that's regulated. So different regulation, etc., can differ between markets and obviously legal processes. But at its core, these 4 steps can be applied anywhere. You know, those 4 steps. So entering the deal, gathering information, physical inspection. That's anywhere. You know, every property will have legal considerations. Zoning will be everywhere, and planning, but obviously in different forms, in different legal frameworks, etc. And then obviously technical, you know, that will be present in some way or another, and obviously financial. So it's very much a standard. I'm trying to find the word. You know, it's a fundamental. This information, these characteristics, they aren't unique to South African property on the whole. And yeah, when we developed it, we have obviously discussed strategy, and we have our ideas list that grew during the build, and then continues to grow, and obviously we hone in on different ideas at different times and prioritize. But expanding to other markets or launching in other property markets, has been on our minds, and came up a while ago, and it might have been reinforced, by there's colleagues that one colleague in particular, or clients I have in Nigeria, obviously just explained obviously what I was involved in and up to at that point, and then he found it very interesting. And like you said, I think Nigeria is a similar market to perhaps that example, like I said, the example you gave in India. So he said, something like this that enables people to gather the information, and it can be questioned, and you can make sure the sources are accurate, is quite valuable. And then recently, someone in Kenya reached out to us with similar premise. So we would like to look at other markets, both emerging complex markets as well as developed markets. Like I said, obviously things can be very different in Nigeria compared to the UK, but there's also similar pain points, and the process is the same. So we're quite excited in the applicability of the toolkit to different markets.
Just a last question here. So are you also selling your product to developers who might offer their due diligence services just to be able to gather more trust and to streamline the process of selling off their apartments for big builders, developers?
Yeah, I would say, Ravi, that the toolkit itself can be utilized by anybody that's conducting a due diligence investigation, whether they sit on either side of the transaction. So developers are actually not excluded. In fact, it's such an important product that could be utilized by them to establish trust with a large number of buyers.
Right.
But I think, and also more beneficial to developers to utilize the product for a site that they might be looking to purchase or acquire for development.
Okay, both sides, so buy and sell. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and particularly in the residential market. In fact, more relevant than purchasing an apartment, for instance, could be a property that has development potential. And I think I see greater relevance. We obviously a greater due diligence process would be required in unpacking, all the potential possibilities with that site, like looking at, bulk factor, all considerations that would go into developing that property. But I wanted to also just say as well, just sort of circling back to that, the previous question is, we're looking at various integration possibilities that streamline the due diligence process, and that is a sort of core focus for us at the moment, and not so much to rapidly expand into different markets, but also to look at how to improve those processes. And there's just a world of opportunity that lies within the integration possibilities. Just being able to access information a lot quicker, would make the effectiveness of our products that much more relevant to those processes. So it's a never-ending journey of learning. We're constantly looking at different opportunities and way to enhance the toolkit.
Got it.
Yeah.
So to close it, since you are at the cutting edge of due diligence, you are a niche player in due diligence. Where do you see in the next 2, 3, 4 years the due diligence segment evolving? Where do you see, or like, I'm sure your roadmap for your product is also evolving in the same direction. So where do you see the world changing in due diligence in the next 3 to 4 years?
We're going to join the the Musks and Zuckerbergs of the world. bring it to that level. But yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think everyone stands to benefit with suitable due diligence, and it's a fundamental. So it's not something new, and like sometimes a lot of tech can just seem a bit superfluous, to certain people. Not that it is, but some of it is. But it's a fundamental. So we're empowering that, using technology and driving transparency. So we'd like to see due diligence as a standard. So our product have a stamp of PropDD, that
exactly, yeah.
carried out. And like Justin said, we're very excited. Like I mentioned, we like all products, you've got to be open to integration and through APIs, etc. And there's so much good stuff out there. Like we don't need to, and it doesn't make sense to recreate like a product that's out there to put into the toolkit.
Right.
There's a lot of companies, and we've had great conversations. The space, obviously depends, I guess, what you're doing, but it's in South Africa, it's quite collaborative. We've had very good conversations, and we've solidified partnerships with companies that provide different services and products. So yeah, like Justin said, I think very excited for the scope for integration and automating parts of the toolkit and bringing in additional services.
Excellent. Well, this brings us to the end of a very, very thought-provoking conversations from Sean and Justin. Sean and Justin, thank you for taking time out and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us.
Thank you, Ravi. It's been wonderful being on your podcast. So thanks for having us, and I hope your listeners found it interesting.
Thanks,
you.
Ravi. And all the best for the success of PropDD.